Hey, what's good everybody? I got these 1994 white cement 3s in a size 6 youth. I took them out of the storage recently and this is what happened to them. The midsoles have completely dried out and rotted. It's hard to believe I got these in 2018 for $90. After the Last Dance documentary aired in 2020, almost all vintage Jordans shot up in price. So that $90 was pretty fair in 2018, but now it's a steal. Back in the day, the vintage grade school shoes look completely different than their adult size counterparts. Nowadays, the grade school pairs look like a spitting image of the men's size. Here's a comparison between the 2018 Black Cement 3 and the 1994 Black Cement 3 in the same size. Alright, really quick, the differences that I see is they made the back tab of the 94s leather instead of plastic. That's why they don't crack. They don't have the mud guard on the 94s. And the elephant print on the toe box looks massive. It looks like a steel boot. So I'm gonna separate the rubber sole from the upper leather using an X-Acto knife by cutting away the stitching on the toe. I'm not gonna lie, this kind of looks like polvoron, which is a Filipino dessert. So I'm gonna use tape to help me remove the excess crumbled midsole that's still on the upper. You could do it freehand, but the tape helps me not make contact with the areas I don't want my cotton balls and acetone to touch. I'm also gonna be using a heat gun on its lowest settings to help me melt the factory glue that's still left on the upper material so I can easily extract it out. Since I'm working on the rubber sole, I can increase the temperature to help me remove the crumbled midsoles and factory adhesive much faster than the leather because I don't want too much heat on the leather. So I'm using these 2016 True Blue 3s as the midsole donors. I got them for damn near almost free because a guy tried to restore them, but he didn't end up finishing them. So I'm gonna use them for my project. So I'm gonna pour acetone inside of the shoes to loosen up the glue that's holding the shoes together. I would never do this to the shoes that I'm restoring because acetone will damage and eat up the leather. Removing the rubber soles is more of a pain since I have to use the heat gun and a lot of acetone. And I'm using a syringe to put in the acetone to separate the rubber sole from the midsole. Now my next step is to remove the factory paint off of the True Blues, and I'll be using acetone and cotton balls for this task. Make sure not to oversaturate the cotton ball with acetone because that can pour into the midsole, and as you're rubbing it back and forth, you might damage the midsoles. So make sure to squeeze off any excess back into your container. And be sure to wear gloves, guys. I know I sound like a hypocrite right now, but you know, protect your hands. So my next step is to deep clean the rubber soles. I'm gonna use dish soap since it cuts grease and dirt so easily, and I'm also using a stiff brush for this project. So this is an issue I'm going to keep running into because I'm using a midsole from 2016. It's not gonna fit 100% on a sole that is from 1994. There's a slight gap at the end of the rubber sole that touches the midsole foam, so I'm just gonna trim a little bit off top just to slide it in without messing up the shape of the shoes.
Slide what in?
I'm gonna start putting a layer of barge cement super stick onto the rubber sole and onto the midsoles. I'm not gonna bond them right away. I'm gonna wait about an hour for the glue to fully cure. So after an hour, I'm gonna reheat the adhesive with my blow dryer. You can use a heat gun, but I found out that the blow dryer pumps out 10,000 cubic feet of air more than a heat gun. No, I'm playing, I have no idea. Just pumps out more air. Yo, my fault that this shot looks washed out. My Sony camera doesn't have the swivel screen like my old Canon, so it's hard for me to see what the picture looks like. I'm going to freehand the re-glue on the midsole to the rubber sole. Anytime you're doing a vintage sole shop, you're gonna have to adjust the midsole to fit on the vintage pair of shoes you're restoring. These new midsoles are thicker than a Snicker compared to the original 94 shoes, so I'm gonna shave it down by using a Dremel tool so the top of the shoe could fit flush on the midsole. The rubber soles are slightly dingy, slightly stained, so I'm going to use Sally's 40 volume to lift up the stains and to also unyellow the oxidized rubber. And I'm going to do this using my indoor setup. If you guys want to check out my light setup, it's in the top right corner. You don't need a setup like this to clear the soles, you can also use the sun. So the next step is to repaint the midsoles, and I'm just going to tape up the midsoles on the areas I don't want my paint to get on. And that includes putting tape over the air bubble. Using an airbrush, I'm going to apply a few thin coats of my paint onto the midsole and a few more heavier coats as I am finishing up. I use an eggshell white mixture that I already had laying around, and they look pretty good. I do still see some blue hits from the original factory paint, so I'm going to use a paintbrush to manually apply paint in those areas to blend in with the rest of my white paint. Now the next step is to apply the black paint on the midsole. And I'm going to be using electrical tape since it's very flexible and it's pretty tacky. And the edges are more straight than painter's tape. And shout out to Hoop Fresh for sharing this tip. When I was taking off the tape, some of the paint peeled off with the tape. So I'm thinking of two possibilities of why this would have happened. One, I didn't apply an adhesion promoter at first. Or two, I didn't apply my first few coats with a hand brush, because that hand brush really packs in that paint. So in order to touch this up, I'm just going to sand the areas down with 1000 grit sandpaper to 1500 grit sandpaper so I can smooth out the edges without seeing the original rip on the paint. So the next step is to clean the upper leather of the shoe. I'm going to be using a sneaker cleaner and a magic eraser. So the sneaker cleaner I'm using is just to revitalize the leather to make it more supple. It's kind of like cleaning with Dove soap. And the magic eraser is there to remove all of the tougher stains that won't come out with the brush. I wasn't able to remove the stains on the tongue with the brush, so I'm going to use the magic eraser to lift up those stains. It's actually really cheap to get them if you get them online opposed to the store. The Mr. Clean magic eraser sells each sponge for about $1.20, but if you get the off-brand ones on Amazon, you can get them for 60 cents each. Or for whatever reason you want to buy the 100 pack, you can go as low as 11 cents per sponge. I'm going to use a matte finisher on the midsole to give it that nice matte look. Now every time I'm about to reglue, I make sure I hit the areas I'm going to be gluing with acetone and cotton balls. Doing this step will make sure that the reglue does last longer. Before I apply glue on the upper leather, I want to make sure I roughen up the areas that make contact with the midsole. This is going to make the reglue a whole lot stronger, and this is to reduce the chances of the reglue separating too soon. This is why I stopped using these cheap wire brushes, because the hairs just fall right off. So I've already taped up the uppers because I don't want any excess glue showing on the final result. I'm going to work in sections. I'm going to start on the heel first, and then I'm going to start on the toe second, and then I'm going to work my way to the sides last. Now same thing with the rubber sole to the midsole. I'm going to let it cure for about an hour. Then I'm going to heat it up again with a blow dryer to reactivate its tackiness. As I was about to glue the shoes together, I noticed that there was a smudge of glue that got on the painted areas on the midsole. So I went to check to see if the other shoe had it too. Luckily it was only on one shoe, so I had to check the footage on how that even happened. And honestly, it was a rookie mistake. I should have been more aware of what I was doing. So excess glue dripped while I was applying glue on the upper. Well, that's a lesson learned. I'm just going to be more mindful of where things are next time. So right now, I'm just going to glue the other shoe first and then work on the paint on the other shoe after I'm done with this side. So I already started sanding down on the area, but I'm going to keep sanding until it looks much more smoother. Then I'm going to use my hand brush to fill in the paint with black paint. I'm going to reapply my matte varnish again on the newly painted area. So I'm gonna hit it again with acetone and cotton balls right before I reglue, because yeah, I've also added extra protection on the midsole just in case if my brush that has a little bit of glue on it still touches the midsole, it's gonna get on a tape and not on the paint. Bars. So now that the toe box is attached, I'm going to work on the sides next. Now I'm going to clean up the laces with OxiClean. You can see that they're a little bit dirty, so we're just going to clean it up a little bit until they look better than what they are. Now we're going to move on to the insoles because that's what the sweaty feet would be touching. Except for this part, I'm going to be using dish soap. After cleaning the insoles, I'm going to use this upholstery vacuum to remove any excess water that's on the insoles. Since the Nike Air logo was shot, I'm going to make a brand new one and put it on the insoles. Now to do this, I'm using the Cricut Maker to cut out the stencil, and I found the Nike Air logo on Ask Jeeves. After I cut them in bite-sized pieces, I'm gonna place them on the insole and then heat press it with an iron. Now the very last step is to restitch the toe cap using a sewing awl. So that's gonna wrap it up for this project. I appreciate you guys for watching this video all the way through. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and on TikTok at JohnAndrew00. I hope to see y'all on the next video. Later.